Golden morning light streams through the towering glass doors of Midwest Regional Bank as Sarah Chen Williams adjusts her simple cardigan. Her designer watch, worth more than most cars, peeks subtly from beneath the sleeve. She's traded her usual power suits for everyday wear, determined to experience her newly acquired bank through a customer's eyes. The marble floors echo beneath her sensible flats, another departure from her typical CEO attire. At 42, Sarah had built her reputation in the banking industry through strategic acquisitions and transformative leadership. Her private equity firm had recently completed a confidential purchase of Midwest Regional, a once prestigious institution that had lost its way. The signs of decline were subtle but clear to her trained eye: slightly worn carpeting near the teller windows, outdated brochures scattered across cherry wood tables, and a general atmosphere of complacency that hung in the air like stale coffee. She pauses near a wall of photos showcasing the bank's history, stern-faced men in suits spanning decades of leadership. Soon, her photo would join them, though she imagines hers might include a smile. The irony of the moment isn't lost on her. Standing in the lobby of her own bank, deliberately blending in with the other customers waiting for service. A young mother struggles with a stroller near the entrance, and Sarah instinctively moves to hold the door. The woman's grateful smile reminds her of her own mother, who had cleaned office buildings at night while studying for her accounting degree. Those memories fuel Sarah's mission to transform banking culture from the inside out. Her mother had faced countless microaggressions and outright discrimination at bank branches, just like this one. Despite her immaculate credit and growing successful business, Sarah takes her place in the queue, observing the morning operations with the precision of someone who has orchestrated numerous corporate turnarounds. The tellers seem efficient enough, though their interactions lack warmth. An elderly gentleman in front of her complains about the new mobile banking app, and the young teller's explanation is technically correct, but devoid of empathy. In her leather messenger bag, alongside the $2.5 million check she plans to deposit, sits a notebook filled with observations from visits to other branches. This location, the flagship branch in downtown, would set the tone for the cultural transformation she envisions. Her fingers brush against the smooth paper of the check, a calculated move to test the branch's handling of high-value transactions, particularly from customers who don't fit their typical profile. The security guard, an older man named Earl according to his nameplate, offers her a genuine smile, the first authentic interaction she's experienced since entering. She makes a mental note. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the least obvious places. Perhaps Earl could provide valuable perspective during the upcoming customer service overhaul. As she waits, Sarah reflects on the board meeting from yesterday, where she had sat quietly as the outgoing executives boasted about their inclusive banking practices and commitment to the community. None of them had recognized her as the woman who now owned a controlling interest in their institution. Their comfortable assumptions were about to be challenged, much like her own presence would challenge the assumptions of the staff today. The branch manager's office door opens, and Sarah catches his first dismissive glance in her direction. She straightens her cardigan once more, a gesture that had become almost meditative during her 20-year journey from scholarship student to banking CEO. Her heart rate remains steady, years of boardroom battles having taught her that real power lies in patience and precision, rather than immediate confrontation. She's about to give this branch manager a lesson he'll never forget. But first, she'll give him every opportunity to prove her initial impressions wrong. Dennis Palmer glances at Sarah from his manager's desk, his eyes lingering on her casual attire before dismissively waving her toward the waiting area. She notices how he warmly greets an older gentleman in a business suit, escorting him directly to a private office despite having arrived later. Sarah pulls out her phone, quietly documenting the time and interactions. The morning sun casts long shadows across the lobby, marking the minutes as they tick by without acknowledgement. Through the glass partition of his office, Palmer can be seen laughing with the suited gentleman, their conversation animated and comfortable. Sarah observes how he gestures to family photos on his desk, creating a personal connection that he hadn't bothered to attempt with other customers. particularly those who looked like her. She makes another note in her phone, cataloging the disparity in treatment with the precision of someone who has spent years studying institutional behaviors. A young black couple enters the bank, dressed professionally, and carrying what appears to be mortgage application documents. Palmer emerges from his office just long enough to direct them to the loan officer's desk, where they'll likely wait far longer than the 20 minutes he's already spent chatting about golf with his current guest. Sarah recognizes the subtle dance of discrimination, not overt enough to trigger immediate complaints, but persistent enough to maintain invisible barriers. The branch's foot traffic increases as the morning progresses. Sarah watches the careful choreography of preferential treatment play out repeatedly. White customers in business attire are promptly assisted, while others face prolonged waits or are directed to teller windows regardless of their banking needs. Palmer's behavior follows a pattern so ingrained he likely doesn't even recognize it himself. From her seat, Sarah begins a detailed mental inventory of the branch's operations. The promotional materials scattered throughout the waiting area speak of community investment and equal opportunity, yet the faces in their brochures tell a different story. The wall of local business success stories features an overwhelming majority of one demographic, despite the diverse neighborhood the branch serves. A senior teller approaches Palmer's office with a stack of documents, and Sarah overhears their conversation about daily transaction limits and approval protocols. She makes particular note of the numbers mentioned, information that will prove valuable very soon. Palmer's voice carries an air of self-importance as he explains policies he'll selectively enforce within the hour. The suited gentleman finally emerges from Palmer's office, shaking hands and exchanging business cards in a display of camaraderie. Palmer's smile fades as he surveys the lobby, his eyes skipping past Sarah as if she were part of the furniture. He calls forward another customer who had arrived well after her, a pattern so blatant it would be almost comical if it weren't so problematic. Sarah shifts in her chair, deliberately catching Palmer's eye. He responds with an impatient gesture suggesting she continue to wait. Her Michael Kors bag, deliberately chosen instead of her usual Birkin, contains documentation that would send Palmer scrambling to attention, but she remains committed to experiencing the full extent of the branch's biased customer service. The clock on the wall ticks past another quarter hour. Sarah uses the time to compose an email to her board about implementing mystery shopper programs across all branches, drawing from this morning's experience. Her own story would serve as a powerful opening example in the diversity training modules she now knows are desperately needed. Palmer emerges once again, this time ushering an elderly white woman to his office with excessive courtesy. Just a few more minutes, he calls out to the remaining customers, though his eyes never quite meet Sarah's. She allows herself a small smile, knowing that a few more minutes will lead to one of the most memorable moments in Dennis Palmer's banking career. The leather chair creaks as Sarah rises after nearly an hour of waiting. The morning has painted a clear picture of the branch's culture, and now it's time for the next phase of her assessment. She approaches Palmer's desk with measured steps, the $2.5 million check tucked neatly between her fingers. His expression shifts from disinterest to poorly concealed suspicion as she places the check on his desk. Palmer picks up the check as if it might bite him, holding it to the light and squinting at the watermarks. His fingers run along the edges, flip it over repeatedly, and examine the signature with exaggerated scrutiny. Sarah stands patiently, watching his performance with the detached interest of someone who has witnessed this dance countless times before. This is a rather unusual amount, Palmer begins, emphasizing unusual as if it were synonymous with suspicious. He pulls out a magnifying glass from his desk drawer, a theatrical touch Sarah finds particularly interesting, given that he hadn't used it for any previous transactions she'd observed. You understand, of course, that we have to take special precautions with transactions of this nature. Sarah maintains her composure as Palmer launches into a condescending lecture about recent fraud schemes targeting banks. His voice carries across the lobby, deliberately loud enough for others to hear, marking her as potentially suspicious. A knowing smile plays at the corners of her mouth as he explains basic banking concepts to someone who owns the very chair he's sitting in. Perhaps, Palmer continues, leaning back in his chair with an air of authority that suddenly seems childish, you could explain where this check came from. His tone suggests he's already decided on its illegitimacy, his fingers drumming against the check in a rhythm of disapproval. The question hangs in the air, heavy with assumption and prejudice. Sarah watches as he pulls up his computer screen, making a show of checking various databases. His performance is meant to intimidate, but she notices the slight tremor in his hands that betrays his nervousness about the transaction size. A few other customers have begun to watch the interaction, some with sympathy in their eyes, others purposefully looking away. It's a business transaction. Sarah replies simply, her voice calm and measured. She can see the muscle in Palmer's jaw tighten at her deliberate vagueness. The check's amount represents a small portion of the actual purchase price of his bank, but he doesn't need to know that quite yet. Palmer's tie, a bland striped affair that had been perfectly straight all morning, has begun to tilt slightly as he grows more agitated. We have very strict protocols for unusual transactions, he repeats, emphasizing strict as if it were a weapon. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable visiting the check-cashing establishment down the street. They might be better equipped to handle your situation. The suggestion carries clear implications, each word carefully chosen to maintain plausible deniability while conveying his real message. Sarah notes how he's positioned himself to be visible to the security guard, a subtle signal of his growing discomfort with her presence. The morning sun has fully illuminated the lobby now, casting sharp shadows across Palmer's desk as he continues his performance. Sarah allows him to proceed, documenting every micro-expression and carefully coded phrase. His handling of this transaction will become a case study in the bank's new training program, though not in the way he imagines. Mr. Palmer, Sarah finally interjects, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who has navigated countless boardrooms. Would you like to contact your superior about this transaction? She's offering him a lifeline, one last chance to handle the situation professionally. Instead, his face flushes with indignation at the suggestion that he might need supervision. Palmer's voice grows louder as Sarah calmly questions his process, his words carrying across the marble floors like scattered marbles. Her composed demeanor seems to agitate him further, disrupting his usual script for turning away unwanted customers. Other patrons turn to watch the unfolding scene, their own banking matters momentarily forgotten. Ma'am, Palmer's voice takes on an edge sharp enough to cut. I've explained our policies regarding unusual transactions. The amount on this check raises several red flags. He straightens papers on his desk that don't need straightening, a nervous habit betraying his growing discomfort. Sarah stands perfectly still, her presence becoming more commanding through her silence. The security guard shifts his weight near the entrance, uncertain whether to approach. Palmer keeps glancing in his direction, silently willing him to intervene without explicit instruction. Sarah notices this subtle dance of authority and pulls out her phone, beginning to record the interaction. This seemingly simple action causes Palmer to become increasingly agitated. Recording is not permitted in this facility, he announces, half rising from his chair. His tie, now fully askew, matches his crumbling composure. This is a private banking institution, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't comply with our policies. The word anyone carries a weight of implications heavy enough to sink a battleship. Sarah's fingers move swiftly across her phone screen as she continues documenting the exchange. Could you please cite the specific policy that prevents recording in a public lobby? Her question lands like a chess move, precisely placed and impossible to counter without revealing his true motives. Several customers have their own phones out now, sensing the tension building in the air. Palmer's face flushes deeper as he fumbles through a drawer, presumably searching for a policy manual that won't help his case. Perhaps, he suggests, his voice straining to maintain professional distance, you should try the check-cashing store down on 9th Street. They handle more diverse transactions. The word diverse hangs in the air like smoke, its intended meaning clear to everyone within earshot. A young black teller behind the counter winces slightly, her discomfort with the situation visible despite her attempted professional mask. Sarah makes a mental note to speak with her later. Such employees often provide valuable insights into institutional culture. Mr. Palmer, Sarah's voice remains steady. I'm simply requesting to deposit a valid check into my account. Could you explain exactly why you're suggesting I take my business elsewhere? The question is a spotlight, illuminating the shadows where bias usually hides. Palmer begins to sweat visibly, his starched collar no longer quite so crisp. He attempts to regain control of the situation, reaching for the phone on his desk. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Security. The last word comes out as more question than command, his authority wavering in the face of Sarah's unwavering calm. The security guard approaches reluctantly, his namesake, Earl, catching the morning light. His expression suggests he's seen this scene play out before, though perhaps never with such an attentive audience. Sarah acknowledges him with a gentle nod before turning back to Palmer. Before you proceed with that request, she states clearly, each word precise and measured, you might want to contact your superior. She places deliberate emphasis on the last word, watching Palmer's reaction. His fingers hover over the phone's keypad, uncertainty finally cracking his facade of authority. The lobby has grown silent except for the soft whir of ceiling fans and the muted clicks of phone cameras. Every person in the space seems to be holding their breath, waiting to see how this challenge to unspoken banking protocols will resolve. Palmer's world of comfortable assumptions is about to shatter, and Sarah's phone continues recording every moment. The security guard approaches hesitantly at Palmer's beckoning, but Sarah remains rooted to her spot, a pillar of composure in the tension-filled lobby. Her perfectly manicured nails tap a familiar number on her phone screen, each digit dialed with purposeful precision. Palmer's face contorts into a blend of irritation and smug satisfaction, believing he's about to witness another difficult customer being escorted out. Since you insist on escalating this situation, Sarah speaks clearly, her phone now on speaker. I believe a conversation with Chairman Thompson might be enlightening. The name drops like a stone in still water, ripples of recognition spreading across Palmer's face. Before he can process this information, a booming voice fills the lobby. Sarah, I trust everything is proceeding according to plan with the branch inspection. Chairman Thompson's voice echoes through the speaker, warm and familiar. The board is eager to hear your first-hand assessment of our customer service standards. Each word hits Palmer like a physical blow, the color draining from his face in steady increments. The security guard, Earl, takes a deliberate step backward, years of experience telling him the winds of power have suddenly shifted. Other employees freeze in their tracks, papers and transactions forgotten as they process the implications of what they're hearing. The young teller who had winced earlier now watches with undisguised interest, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Actually, Charles, Sarah responds, maintaining eye contact with Palmer. I'm experiencing some resistance regarding a routine deposit. Mr. Palmer here seems to think my check would be better handled at a check-cashing establishment. Her words hang in the air like suspended daggers, each one precisely aimed. Chairman Thompson's laugh booms through the speaker, devoid of humor. Palmer, suggesting our new CEO take a $2.5 million check to a check-cashing store. The silence that follows is deafening. Palmer's tie, now completely askew, seems to strangle him as the reality of his situation dawns. Sarah watches as Palmer attempts to form words, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His previous confidence evaporates under the weight of his monumental error. The customers who had been watching the scene unfold now whisper among themselves, phones still recording what has become an inadvertent lesson in prejudice and power. I didn't realize, Palmer stammers, his hands gripping the edge of his desk for support. The family photos he had so proudly shared with the suited gentleman earlier now seemed to mock him, their smiling faces witnessing his professional undoing. Clearly, Sarah responds, ending the call with a gentle tap. The lobby remains silent except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant chime of the door sensor as a customer leaves, likely to share this story with anyone who will listen. Earl, the security guard, has positioned himself near the exit, his body language now protective of Sarah rather than threatening. Palmer's computer screen still displays the transaction review page, the cursor blinking accusingly next to the amount he had found so suspicious. The morning sun, now high enough to clear the neighboring buildings, streams through the windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like witnesses to this moment of reckoning. The regional director's hurried footsteps can be heard approaching from the parking lot, his arrival imminent. Sarah takes this moment of suspended animation to look around the lobby, mentally noting every face, every reaction. This moment, though uncomfortable for many, will serve as the catalyst for the changes she envisions. Palmer's world of comfortable assumptions and unchecked biases is about to undergo a seismic shift, and she intends to ensure that every tremor serves a purpose in rebuilding the bank's culture from the ground up. The regional director bursts through the glass doors, his arrival announced by the jangling of the security sensors and his labored breathing. Marcus Reynolds, known for his meticulous appearance, has perspiration staining his collar and his usually perfect silver hair disheveled. He takes in the scene before him. Palmer frozen behind his desk, Sarah standing calmly at its edge, and a lobby full of customers whose phones are still raised to capture every moment. Mrs. Chen Williams, Reynolds manages between breaths. I came as soon as the chairman called. His eyes dart between Sarah and Palmer, trying to gauge the level of damage control needed. The distinction between his professional greeting and Palmer's earlier dismissive treatment hangs in the air like a neon sign. Sarah turns to face Reynolds, her expression neutral but commanding. Marcus, I was just experiencing your branch's unique approach to customer service. Her emphasis on unique causes Palmer to sink further into his chair, the leather squeaking in protest. Several customers suppress smiles, witnessing justice unfold in real time. Reynolds quickly crosses the lobby, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floors. Mr. Palmer, he addresses the branch manager, whose complexion has taken on an ashen hue. Do you realize who you've been speaking with? The question is redundant. Palmer's face shows he's painfully aware of his catastrophic error in judgment. Allow me to formally introduce Sarah Chen Williams, Reynolds announces, his voice carrying across the hushed lobby. As of yesterday's board meeting, she is the majority owner of Midwest Regional Bank and our incoming CEO. Each word lands like a hammer on Palmer's professional coffin. The young teller behind the counter gasps audibly, and the security guard, Earl, nods in quiet satisfaction. Palmer attempts to stand, his legs unsteady. Mrs. Chen Williams, I had no idea. I was simply following standard protocol for large transactions. His words trail off as he realizes how hollow they sound. His earlier confidence evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. A customer in the waiting area whispers loudly to her companion. That's why you never judge a book by its cover. The comment ripples through the lobby, accompanied by knowing looks and subtle nods. Palmer's face flushes anew, the public nature of his humiliation complete. Sarah raises her hand slightly, silencing the murmurs. Standard protocol, Mr. Palmer. Is it standard protocol to suggest that customers who don't match your preconceptions should take their business to check cashing stores? Her question cuts through his weak defense like a hot knife through butter. Reynolds winces at this revelation, already imagining the HR nightmare unfolding before him. Mrs. Chen Williams, I assure you this isn't representative of our bank's values. He turns to Palmer. Mr. Palmer, please gather your things and report to HR immediately. But Sarah interrupts, her voice firm yet thoughtful. Actually, Marcus, I have a different approach in mind. The tension in the lobby shifts, all eyes focused on her next words. Palmer looks up, a glimmer of hope mixing with his fear. This moment shouldn't be wasted on simply punitive measures. I believe it presents an opportunity for something more meaningful. The morning sun now fills the lobby completely, casting long shadows behind every person present. Sarah's silhouette stretches across Palmer's desk, a physical representation of how her presence will reshape the institution. The security cameras silently record everything, their red lights blinking steadily, documenting a moment that will soon become a cornerstone of corporate training materials. Reynolds straightens his tie, recognizing that he's witnessing not just a confrontation, but the beginning of a transformation. The customers who had been recording lower their phones, sensing that the real story is just beginning to unfold. Palmer remains seated, suspended between his past certainties and an uncertain future, awaiting whatever verdict his new CEO will deliver. The bank's largest conference room falls silent as Sarah stands at its head, her casual cardigan replaced with a crisp blazer that commands attention. The morning's events have transformed into an impromptu all-staff meeting, with employees from every department crowded around the mahogany table. Palmer sits in the front row, his tie straightened but shoulders slumped, awaiting what many assume will be his public dismissal. This morning, Sarah begins, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I experienced what countless customers face daily in banks across our nation. She moves around the table slowly, making eye contact with each person present. The security footage from the lobby plays silently on the screen behind her, a visual testament to the day's events. Mr. Palmer, she continues, turning to face him directly, was kind enough to provide us with a perfect case study in institutional bias. Palmer flinches at her words, but Sarah's tone carries no malice. But what happened today isn't just about one interaction or one employee. It's about a system that has normalized discrimination to the point of invisibility. Sarah reaches into her bag and pulls out a worn leather wallet. 30 years ago, my mother walked into a branch much like ours. She had just received her first business loan after years of cleaning offices at night while studying accounting. The branch manager took one look at her and suggested she try the check cashing store down the street. The parallel hangs heavy in the air, causing Palmer to sink further into his chair. Reynolds shifts uncomfortably in his seat as Sarah continues. Today, I own that bank, and this one, and several others. She pauses, letting the information settle. But how many brilliant entrepreneurs, how many hard-working individuals have we turned away because they didn't fit someone's preconception of success? The young teller from the morning raises her hand tentatively. I've seen it happen, she admits, her voice gaining strength. But I never knew how to speak up. Others nod in agreement, a den of silence finally breaking. Sarah acknowledges each comment, each shared experience, before revealing her plan. Starting today, we're implementing comprehensive changes, not just sensitivity training or diversity seminars, but a complete restructuring of how we evaluate and serve our community. She gestures to Palmer, who seems to brace himself. And Mr. Palmer will help lead this initiative. A murmur of surprise ripples through the room. Palmer's head snaps up, disbelief etched across his features. Mrs. Chen Williams, I don't understand, he stammers, but Sarah raises her hand. Understanding is exactly what we need to develop, she explains. Your experience, Mr. Palmer, including your mistakes today, makes you uniquely qualified to help identify and correct these biases in our system. The room watches as Palmer processes this unexpected turn of events, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. Sarah moves to the conference room windows, gesturing at the diverse neighborhood beyond. Our success depends on our ability to serve everyone in our community, not just those who fit our preconceptions of wealth or status. She turns back to the room, her gaze encompassing all present. Today's incident wasn't the end of someone's career. It's the beginning of our transformation. As the meeting concludes, employees file out with a new sense of purpose. Palmer remains seated, processing the weight of his new responsibility. Sarah approaches him quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Your first assignment, she says, sliding a folder across the table, is to review these denied loan applications from the past year. Look for patterns we need to address. Palmer nods, understanding the opportunity he's been given. The conference room empties, leaving him alone with the folder and the knowledge that his greatest professional embarrassment has become his chance for meaningful redemption. Autumn leaves swirl past the same glass doors as Sarah strides into the bank 6 months later, though nearly everything else has changed. The formerly austere lobby now hums with energy, its walls adorned with local artwork and success stories reflecting the community's diverse fabric. Gone are the stern portraits of past executives, replaced by a vibrant mural depicting the neighborhood's history and future. Palmer stands at his desk, now positioned in the open lobby rather than behind imposing walls, as he guides a young Latina entrepreneur through her business loan application. His demeanor bears little resemblance to the man who had once suggested Sarah visit a check-cashing store. His eyes shine with genuine interest as the woman describes her plans for expanding her food truck business into a restaurant. "We can structure this loan to accommodate your seasonal fluctuations," Palmer explains, using terms that inform rather than intimidate. "And our new business development program offers mentorship opportunities that might interest you." Sarah observes from near the entrance, noting how he hands the entrepreneur his personal business card, ensuring she can reach him directly with questions. The young teller from that fateful morning, now promoted to community outreach coordinator, leads a financial literacy workshop in the newly created community room. Through the glass walls, Sarah watches as elderly residents learn to navigate online banking on tablets provided by the bank. The scene stands in stark contrast to the dismissive treatment she had witnessed 6 months ago. Earl, the security guard, greets customers with the same warmth he'd always shown, but now his role has evolved to include serving as a welcoming ambassador rather than an intimidating presence. He guides newcomers to the appropriate departments, his natural empathy finally recognized as an asset rather than an afterthought. Sarah makes her way to Palmer's desk as his meeting concludes. The entrepreneur leaves with a smile and stack of documents that represent possibility rather than bureaucracy. On his desk sits a framed photo from the bank's latest community funding initiative. Palmer and Sarah standing together with the first graduating class of their small business incubator program. 6 months, Sarah remarks, picking up the frame. "Did you ever imagine this is where we'd be?" Palmer shakes his head, a mixture of embarrassment and pride crossing his face. "That day changed everything," he admits, gesturing to the transformed space around them. The branch's numbers tell the story. Loan approvals have increased by 60% across all demographics, while defaults have decreased. The Community Reinvestment Program, born from Palmer's own recommendations after reviewing years of denied applications, has become a model for other branches. The regional office called again, Palmer says, straightening a stack of brochures advertising their new programs. 3 more branches want to implement our community engagement model. The irony isn't lost on either of them. The man who once exemplified the problem has become instrumental in creating solutions. Sarah watches as a diverse stream of customers flows through the bank, each receiving the same level of respect and attention she had been denied that summer morning. The transformation extends beyond policies and procedures. It's evident in every interaction, every transaction, every opportunity recognized rather than dismissed. "We're not finished yet," Sarah notes, picking up one of the brochures. "But we're building something meaningful here." Palmer nods, his gaze falling on a quote newly painted on the wall, words that have become the branch's unofficial motto. "Every dream deserves a fair chance." As Sarah heads to her next meeting, she passes the spot where she had stood 6 months ago, holding that $2.5 million check. The space has been transformed, much like the institution itself, into something more open, more welcoming, more just. Through the front windows, autumn leaves continue their dance, nature's reminder that change, while inevitable, can also be beautiful.